This is a video on YouTube by the creator David Hoffman. The title of it is Her Family Were Racist. She reveals what they were so afraid of. And when I first viewed this video, it struck me as indicative of what's happening today in 2025. I would like to just read his description of his efforts and what he discovered. He starts by saying she was filmed in 1989 as part of a television series that I was making, asking baby boomers to reflect back up on their upbringings in the 50s and 60s. We selected about 200 people to interview at length from thousands, and she was selected because she was such a thoughtful and kind person with an understanding and some sympathy for those segregationists in her family who she described as having intense fear, a fear of losing control. All of my career of interviewing thousands of people, I never found anyone as blunt and direct describing what was her people feared so much. She described it, her family, and the South feared any change in the status quo. There were politicians, local, state, and national politicians who publicly stated these fears and fueled the flames, as happens right now. She makes a statement in this interview, which is much debated in the comments, that good people can be racist. She described people who heard conspiracy theories from the Reconstruction time after the Civil War, people who saw the murder of Emmett Till as fake news, the concept of integration, of equality and fairness and civil rights was anathema, anathema to her people. It all frightened, and they were convinced that they could stop it and return to things as they had been.
There was a real fear that if you let blacks get control, um, everything would change. And there was no, with some people, there was no idea that there would be any fairness or any democracy or anything, that there would be a decent, uh, well-run city government, county government, whatever. It was like, if this happens, we're lost. And it was just a terrible fear.
Let's examine why she feared blacks coming into power and things being equal, because her rationale is things wouldn't be run right and they would lose democracy as they know it. But let's examine where that premise came from. Theories, European and American thinkers had woven elaborate racial science theories that cast Africans as biologically inferior and fit only for hard labor. Framed this way, torture and enslavement became a natural order rather than moral transgressions. There were hundreds of years of atrocities committed by Caucasians against Africans. What happens to their souls? Will African Americans ever accept that Caucasians can't acknowledge their horrible behavior.
So they didn't want to do anything that might cause any kind of dissension. Politicians, even people who knew better, who would have been willing to go further personally or to have the state move forward, were always bound by fear of not getting reelected. And so, really, people who knew better just stuck with racism for political reasons, is what I think.
I believe that racism is a team sport, that greed is the motivation, and control over resources is the goal. In her explanation of why racism was tolerated in the white community is for political reasons. And for me, the the things that went on until her time clearly shows that it was more than just political, even though political can constitute control, but it, it's it's not understandable why someone would dehumanize another human being, and that's that's where I have a problem.
But mostly I think it is of losing control. I mean, there was some higher level of trust, even of dishonest or corrupt white politicians, than of a black in some position of authority over you, for people who had grown up with these myths and fears.
The fear that they felt was the realization of how evil they had been towards African Americans, and they feared retribution. They feared being treated like they had been treating African Americans. And once again, I'll tell you, their fears are fueled by guilt. Their guilt is fueled by shame. Their shame is fueled by denialism. Their denialism is fueled by the refusal to accept accountability for the atrocities they have committed. And that won't change.
Who actually became physically ill every time there was any big desegregation news. I mean, you could just count on it. If you went to their house, you knew they were going to be in bed. It really just was. This was after I was a grown woman, and it was pretty startling to me to discover that there were people that had that kind of, that were bound in that way to racism.
You can hear the anguish in her voice, but you have to realize that psychologically, both the races, both the enslaved, were being harmed. It began with the European colonization of Africa. At its core, it was an enterprise of greed, seizure of land and resources to fuel industrial growth and national prestige. Ideological, strong, ideological constructs of a civilizing mission, of racial hierarchy, were crafted not to uplift but to rationalize their plunder. Dehumanization was not accidental but essential. Portraying Africans as others made it psychologically and legally possible to steal their wealth with impunity, to enslave them, to force free labor from them, to brutalize, to murder, to rape. It's horrendous. And it hurts her so bad she doesn't want to actually acknowledge the pain that Caucasians caused.
For me, it's there's a lot of guilt that's involved, because growing up, if you grow up and accept things the way they are, then you have to wonder, why did you accept all of this? Why did you not question more, or why didn't you think about all these things that were happening?
Finally, she faces the underlying problem with the society that she was raised in. Guilt finally comes out as a primary cause and a real reason for fear. We have to understand that even though they may not speak of it, they understand that greed, the unrelenting demand for land, for labor, and resources was the engine, but it was ideology as the lubricant, institutions as the frame, and psychological mechanisms as the failsafe, all combining to transform profit seeking into systematic atrocities, selective memory and myth making, dehumanization as self justification. Without dismantling these overlapping systems, economic incentives, legal impunity, racist ideology, and moral disengagement, the legacy of brutality cannot be fully comprehended or undone. What type of monster could intentionally plan to destroy another human being?
And I don't know what the answer to that is. My great grandfather was a really good man, but he was really racist also.
Her grandfather was a good man, but a really racist man. Is not exactly, they don't match. Let's put it that way. Let's look at this. Racism takes seven forms: representationally, ideologically, discursive, interactional, institutional, structural, and systemic. Racism exists to justify and reproduce a racial hierarchy and racially structured society that unjustly limits access to resources, rights, and privileges based on race. A bigot versus a racist. What's the difference? A racist is someone who holds the belief that race determines human traits and capacities and in the inherent superiority of a particular race. By definition, a bigot also is someone who regards or treats the member of a particular group with hatred, and intolerance. Therefore, can someone be racist and bigoted and still be considered a good person? A person who actively holds beliefs or engages in behavior that harms, dehumanizes, or excludes others based on identity reflects a deep failure of empathy, justice, and basic human decency. A truly good person seeks to do right by others, challenges their biases, and refuses to oppose systems of hate or exclusion. Well, the mental gymnastics that Caucasians do to justify their racism is monumental.
There were a lot of really good people who were and are racist, and I don't know how you explain or justify, or a lot of people wouldn't even accept the fact that you can be both, but in my belief you can. For instance, there were a lot of people who were willing to accept when Emmett Till was murdered, there were people who were willing to accept the fact that this was, I don't remember if they said it was a prank or what, but I mean there were stories that this didn't really happen before they found the body, and there were people who were willing to accept that. There were the same kind of attitude was with almost everything, where there was not an immediate finding of a body. There was always this thing, this is something somebody's made up, you know, just a lot of denial. A lot of people who didn't want to believe that this sort of thing would happen, and would refuse to accept the fact that it was happening.
There's a book that was written by these two white gentlemen called Without Sanctuary. If you ever get a chance to read it, it is one of the most profoundly disturbing books I've ever seen in my life. It's a pictorial history of lynchings and what they used to call nigger barbecues. I'm talking about children, women, male adults lynched. And then they used to put us alive on spits with a fire beneath it and turn us and roast us until we dehydrated. And they pick up pieces of the bodies, and hundreds of whites would be standing and taking pictures with a body piece in their hand. They have the pictures, they show the pictures in the book. And they say, just get over that? You don't get over that.
I think there were a lot of people who did think it would be stopped, who never thought the change would actually happen, even after it was happening. And I think if there had not been that attitude, if people had known the change was going to happen anyhow, maybe it would have been faster. Maybe the holding the line would not have been so long and painful. But I think that part of the reason that there was not more change is just that people never did accept it as the reality of the day.